In this tutorial, we're going to build a Roman Gladius. So I've opened up my Gladius reference file. There's a max file that has a reference plane. The Gladius has actually been sized to be the proper size. I'm going to go to my front view and turn on default shading. And then I'm going to click maximize viewport. So I'm going to be building from reference again. I want to make sure that as I'm doing this, I'm in a front view. The background's white, so actually let's jump into the material editor. And I'm going to say material, get all scene materials, and then just double click on this guy, change the diffuse color to full black, go into maps and just reduce the opacity here to like 25, and then close it. There we go. It's a little bit easier to see. Now we don't have to worry about our white selection being on a white background. All right, so here in create, I'm just going to go line. I'm just going to kind of drop a couple points in here that kind of represent that shape. I did it really sloppy because I really want to drive home that when you're creating a line, when you're first creating it, you do not try to match the shape. All right, it's just going to cause frustration. Now you can go into modify, and it's going to be a lot easier for you to go through and manipulate it. I'm going to grab all my points, right click, and say corner. All right, so let's grab this first point, go into move. I'm going to move it down, and let's zoom out. I'm going to keep zooming in a little bit too close to these tutorials. And I think I'm kind of teaching you some bad habits. I like to keep my distance as I'm working here. And I'm not, while it is true, I can make my spline objects be much smoother as they go. What I like to do is I like to keep them very chunky because these are game art, right? This is a game art class. We're making them for game art. And while engines like Unreal 5 are really pushing polygon counts, for us, we need to consider that Unreal 5 isn't the only game engine out there, right? There's lots of different ways you could be making games. Maybe you're going to make a game for mobile, right? And so maybe you're going to have a stylized game. So I'm going to keep teaching you how to make things low poly because it's always easy to up the resolution on something to make it more high poly, which is actually something we'll cover in a later lesson. It's a lot harder to make something lower polygon. Now you may have a friend who has done 3D before and they're like, oh, well, he's lying. He doesn't know what he's talking about. And I'll just say, well, you know, everybody has their opinions, and I find that it's easier to go from low poly to high poly than it is the other way, but you know, I don't have all the answers. So as you can see, I'm just kind of going in and dropping some points in here as I go, and trying to approximate kind of the overall, oops. Basically, if you double click, you're going to select all of a selection. That's what it's occasionally happening to me here. I'm just using refine to add points. And I'm trying to kind of generally block in the general shape of this model. There's some tools, like I haven't shown you this, if you go into segment and grab segments, you can actually, there's a divide option. It'll divide them. So now I can go grab those points and just bring those back in. And I'm going to bring them in a little further. I'm going to bring these outer points out a little bit more because I'm going to use these points with chamfer. Oops. All right, that's pretty extreme. So maybe I just need to try typing 0.5. That's good. Maybe I'll take these points and maybe we'll do something like 0.25. Oops, I did fillet. This fillet rounds them out. So let's undo that and do it as a chamfer. 0.25. There we go. And so we can just grab our points here and move everything back over. And make sure, as you go, right-click and say corner, because we want to make sure we're keeping these as corners. If you ever want to try and line these up, you'll notice there's no easy alignment tools here. What you could do is go into scale, and you'll need to change your pivot point from center, because it's currently centered on each one. If you change it to selection center, then you can actually drag this X over, and it'll actually kind of line them all up for you. Like here, I'll show you. If I take all these guys and do that, see how that lined them all up? Now, I didn't necessarily want that. I actually want this guy to be back a little bit. I want all these points to be out just a little bit more. I want all these points over to kind of match that. There we go. So I'm feeling really good about that handle that we have there. So let's go in here and what do we think we're going to do? Lathe, right? So it's before I do it though, I'm going to come here to Effect Pivot Only. So, sorry, I'm going to hierarchy. There's modify, or create, modify hierarchy. I'm going to go effect pivot only. I'm going to change this to 0 because now the center of this line is at 0 in the world, so that when I put a lathe on, it'll do a better job of centering it. And right away, we see that it's showing up dark. And if I come up here and say restore viewport, we zoom in, I believe that's because it is inside out. If we orbit around, we did leave the top and bottom open, so we just need to flip our normals there. There we go. And so, yeah, I just maximize that. This feels really good. I like the shape of it. We hit F4 so we could see our geometry. That feels really good. It's a nice shape to it. So we're going to go ahead and save our work, right? But then I'm going to right click and convert to Edit Poly. Go to Element, click on my model and just say Auto Smooth. And now it's all smoothed out. It's not all faceted. All right, so before we move on to the rest of it, let's talk about what's happening here at the top. We have an opening. I specifically left that open. And the reason for that is you could go in and just select it and cap it. But what I like to do personally, and let's maximize our top view, turn on default shading, turn on edge faces. I like to come in here and in edge mode, I'm going to bridge and I'm going to build that shape at the top so that instead of it just being automatically generated, the triangles by the software, I like to go in and specify it on my own so I have control of where those edge lines are. So now I'm going to do ring, and hit connect, and then I should be able to go into target weld and target weld this over. Perfect. All right. So now let's change this from top view to bottom, and now we're seeing the bottom of the model. So this one, it's a little bit trickier to see. We could even go in display and turn on back face cull, so it's inside out. So now we're seeing the bottom of it. And by the bottom, what I'm talking about, I'll just orbit here real quick. Oops. You know what? It helps if we actually have an edge selected, because then and then we can use orbit down here at the corner because it'll orbit around what I currently have selected. So there you go. See, there's the bottom. So if I switch this over to be a bottom view, when I say the bottom, I'm talking about this outer edge. And we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to come into bridge, and we're going to build the polygons that make up the bottom of the handguard. All right, same way, I'm clicking on an edge and dragging up. And remember, anytime bridge doesn't work for you, it's probably because there's an existing polygon there. I'm going to come over to the little plus sign and click on Show Grid to hide the grid, because this next part, I'm going to select an edge here and hit ring. And once again, I'm going to connect it and then use my target weld to target weld those edges over. Right. We'll switch this back to be a top view. And here we go. Here is our, oops, we'll get out of that view, hit Z to zoom out, Control R to orbit. There we go. There's our handguard. Select that and say Auto Smooth. Right, it's looking pretty good, right? I'm pretty happy with how this looks. So we can go through, if you want, when you're doing your Auto Smooth, sometimes you may want to have this be separate smoothing, and so you can manually come in here and let's just grab everything. You see where it's only using smoothing groups 1 and 2. So maybe we just grab this ball part, uncheck the 1, and then check 3, because 3 was the next available one. And now it smooths there, which is pretty cool. Right. So now we got our handguard. I think that's looking pretty good. Let's come out here. Now we're going to work on the blade. And so for the blade, let's go back to create, and with line, we're going to come in and we're just going to draw out this shape. I can't really see, so I'm going to right click and then go to wireframe, and I'm going to delete that shape. I hit delete on my keyboard. And I realize I can't see my reference. So let's go to default shading, right click to get out of line mode. I'm going to select the handle and then right click and say hide selected. So now I can draw out the shape from my sword, and I can actually see the end, so I can click on it and close my spline. All right, so same thing we're doing when we're making these objects, right? Anytime you're doing a prop like this, you should be building it so it's centered in the world. So we'll come down to X here and just make sure that's at 0. And then I can go to modify and select a vertex point and make sure the very tip is at 0. And then I can kind of refine my shape. And I'm just going to focus on one side. In this case, I'm going to focus here on the left because it's easier to see the edges. There we go. It's looking pretty good. I'm not going to worry about the right. And you're going to see why. Well, actually, at this point, you've done the Pokeball, so you know there's an option to mirror from one side to the other, so we're just going to use symmetry on it. All right, we have this shape. We closed it off, and so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use one of my tools. And if you remember back when we did the Texas table bevel profile, I showed you there's this tool called Bevel. So let's maximize out here. I'm going to go ahead and give this a value of 1, which is really intense. So maybe we'll reduce that down to 0.1. And then we'll do level 2, which we're going to call, we'll give that a height of like 0.1 as well. And then here for this level 2 outline, we're going to give it a value of -1. Let's take a look at the reference. No, I'm looking at the sword, and I don't want necessarily to come, looks like it comes fully to a point here. So I'm just going to do the value of 1 so I get those edges. I'm going to right click on this model and say convert to edit poly. So now it's object properties. So I'm going to right click on the model and go into object properties. I'm going to change the visibility to 0.1 and hit OK. So now you notice the model is transparent. At this point, let's go into polygon. I'm going to region select, but then hold Alt and deselect because I just want to get these polygons at the top, which I guess thinking about it would have been easier just to region select up here, right? And you see it's getting the polygon on the back. All right, if I orbit around, that's fine. I don't care about the back, so I'm just going to hit delete. I'm going to maximize this viewport. Let's go into vertex, grab these vertex points, and we're going to line this along Y. Just drag them up a little bit. And then I'm going to grab these points. And before I do anything, I'm going to click on Editable Poly. So I'm at the top. I'm not in a sub-object. I'm going to find my symmetry modifier. It should be down here, unless you've set up your modifier sets in there. And you're going to want to change the axis. So turn off Z and turn on X. And there you go. You see it's mirroring, but I actually want it to mirror to the other side. So I'm going to click the flip. See that? It's mirroring them together. So we've got a little bit of artifacting here. So let's go down in the modifier set and select this point. He is at 0. What is this point at? He's not quite at 0. So we'll make sure he's at 0. So that now, if I click on Editable Poly so that we're at the top again, the top level of that modifier set, go up to symmetry. There we go. Now we have it. Now that looks good. Let's right click and convert to Editable Poly. So now we have kind of our front is looking pretty good. This sword in particular, this one comes to a point in the center. So we could select this edge, and I'm going to hold control and click on remove because that'll get rid of both the edge and the point. If you don't hold control when you do it, you'll leave a point at the top. Now I want to select these 2 points together. I'm going to click connect to connect them together, but then I'm going to click collapse over here. And then same thing, I'm going to grab these 2 points up here and click collapse to collapse them together. If you look now, we're coming to a point up here, which is good. We do have, it looks like a random little point right here left over. So we'll select him and just say remove to remove that point. All right. And now we'll put another symmetry on, but we're going to leave it on Z because we want to do symmetry to get what's in the front onto the back side. We'll right click and say convert to edit poly. And now if we go into edge, we can just orbit around, and let's grab this edge here, and I'm going to come up, I'm going to find my loops, which should be up here under modeling loops. And you got to be in edge mode for this to work. If I want loops, remove loop. It's going to get rid of that edge going all the way around. And then I'm going to select this edge and hit ring. And now I want to collapse that. And so now it's collapsed it down to a point. You can see it's got this kind of diamond shape. We can even come in here and grab these vertex points, right click and say scale. We can scale them out a little bit. So now we're going to, let's turn our grid back on here to make sure he's centered. He is centered, which is perfect. That's just what we want. Let's right click anywhere in negative space and say unhide all. And let's just kind of orbit this around so we're kind of looking at the front of our sword. We can turn our top view back into wireframe. Now let's select the handle, and now we're going to find Edit Geometry and click Attach and select that blade. So now the blade is now part of it. There we go. Now let's Element, click on that blade, right click and go to Scale, and I'm just going to scale it out to make it thicker. I like having a thick blade on this. I think it just looks more fun. All right, so we've already done smoothing groups on the handle, so now let's just select the blade here and say Auto Smooth. And really all it did was just do one on the front and the back. And so we're going to manually come in here. Let's turn into Select, and we'll select this blade, and this is going to be, so if we grab everything, we have 2. So let's just do Clear All, and we'll just do one at a time. 1, 2, 3, 4, orbit around the back, and do 5, 6, orbit 7, and 8. There we go. So now we have ourselves a Roman Gladius. So if you look at that, right, and we orbit it, suppose, yeah, we can orbit around. We can see we have this nice blade. It's got the smoothing groups on it. And we could save our project. And once you've built your model, you can right-click Unfreeze All and select that reference in the background and delete it. And then maybe you'll just do File, Save As. And if you hit the little plus sign, it'll save another version with a number. So now you have a version saved that has the blade, the sword, and the handle, and it's all ready to go. And we'll just call this Gladius. And your initials, underscore Gladius, underscore, and you're going to do LP for low poly, because this is going to be our low poly version. In a later one, we'll talk about how to go in and make it more high res. So that's it. That's how you make a Roman Gladius.